22nd of February 2022.
What I like is being a longer form thinker. You can keep talking, but I'm going to stop listening.
From news.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'll be bringing you part 2 of my chat with comedian Wil Anderson. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to do a quick plug. Wil is performing 2 stand-up shows at the Adelaide Fringe Festival, which is on right now. The shows are called Wilogical and What You Talking About, Wil. He'll also be performing them at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival next month, so make sure you go check him out. Now, in this episode, Wil's going to reveal which radio star is banned from his incredibly popular podcast, which is called Wilosophy. He'll talk about the day he was in the same room as Robin Williams, and he's going to share the 2 best pieces of advice that he's ever received. Wil Anderson, your Wilosophy podcast is massive. You get so many good guests on there. I'm wondering, have you ever thought about doing a TV version of Wilosophy, like something along the lines of Andrew Denton's Enough Rope?
I mean, it's an interesting question. So there's been offers. Like, there's been people who have come to me and said, you know, we'd love to have this, you know, be an interview program. You know, we'd love to have this, you know, be something that we could do on television. But I don't want to do that. I guess is the actual, you know, is the real. I think that would take away. I love the show for what it is. And I love that it has no boss other than me. And I love that I can ask whatever questions that I want to ask and talk about whatever it is that I want to talk about and have whoever on that I want to have on. You know, there's an interesting narrative around the Joe Rogan thing, which is this idea that, you know, Joe's appeal is that he's just asking questions, right? He doesn't have any agenda. He's just asking questions. I am not naive enough to think that can be true. Like, I can believe that he can have no agenda, but what I do not believe is that Alex Jones or Jordan Peterson or whoever he might have on don't have an agenda.
Yeah.
So if you're interviewing someone who has an agenda and you're just asking them questions, you become a platform for elevating those ideas, right? For spreading those ideas more widely. Because if you can't interrogate them ruthlessly, it doesn't work just for the interviewer to have no agenda, because if you don't have any agenda, then you are at the mercy of the person you are interviewing who does have an agenda. So that's the reason that Andrew Bolt is never going to get an invitation to be on the show, or that, you know, Karl Sandilands is never going to get an invitation to be on the show, despite the fact that there are a lot of people who contact me going, I'd love to hear you talk to Karl, or I'd love to hear you talk to Andrew and have that conversation. I don't want to. I don't want to have those conversations because my natural interviewing style is to want to like somebody, to find the best in somebody. That's what the show's about. It's a curiosity show. Like, it's meant to be a show. Often when I tell stories on Wilosophy, it is to give people time to have a moment to, I'm about to ask you about, you know, you just mentioned your grandfather died. I'm about to ask you about that. I'm firstly going to tell you this story about what I went through when my nan died a couple of years during COVID, and I'll tell that story. And that has a twofold thing when I'm interviewing, which is firstly to say, here's some time for you to collect the thoughts that you're going to have about a topic that is a bit hard to talk about. And secondly, I'm sharing something of myself and my own pain to make you know that this is a safe environment for you to share your own stories and your own pain and, you know, your own, not just pain, joy, whatever it is that you want to share. Like, I'm here for that. If I had Andrew on, or if I had, you know, any of those people on, I would want to do the same thing with them. And I don't want to be a show that humanizes Andrew Bolt. That is not like what I want my show to be. If I take my show to a network, that's the pressure you suddenly get. If I take my show to television, that is the pressure that you suddenly get. Like, I individually curate who I have on my show. Like, you know, at the end of the day, no one chooses those guests but me. Most of the time I contact them. Like, most of the people who've been on the show, you know, got a DM from me at some stage going, hey, can you do the show? It is very much an artisanal, homemade, you know, podcast. And that's the way that I like the show, and that's the freedom of the show. And so for me, despite the fact that obviously all those things would be ways to, you know, monetize in a greater way and do all those sort of things, I just don't want to do that. I like the show how it is. I like that it's my show and, you know, I can do with it what I want to do with it.
I get Andrew Bolt. Can I ask Kyle Sandilands, why wouldn't you want to chat to someone like Kyle?
Because, again, like, I mean, I just think that Kyle is great at generating his own publicity. That's fine. He doesn't need a hand from me, you know? Like, you know, Kyle's on news.com.au every second day. He's fine. He doesn't need to be on every day because he said something on my podcast as well, you know? I think we're beyond the time when, you know, so during the lockdown, my partner said to me, she said at one stage, you know, because I'm not talking to anybody else, you know, she's the audience. And at one stage she said to me, you can keep talking, but I'm going to stop listening. And I think that is often great advice for the Kyles and the Andrews of the world. If, like, after a while, I'm just like, we're not going to shut you up. Like, you know, people have decided that there is an audience for what it is that you do, and that is the world that we live in and all those sort of things. That's fine. You can keep talking, but I'm going to stop listening. And that's what I feel with those things. I'm not going to get involved with the debates. I'm not going to, like, I don't care. Kyle said something, great. It's a thing that I don't need to read today. Andrew said something, great. It's a thing that I don't need to read today. You know, like, really freeing up some time in my life.
You mentioned Kyle there. You were on commercial radio for a number of years, most recently on the Hot Breakfast on Triple M with Eddie Maguire and Luke Darcy. That wrapped up in 2019. Would you return to FM radio?
I mean, I said before that show that I never would. So I don't know how good my word would be, you know, even if I told you that I never would. But I don't think so. You know, I didn't think I would last time. And then there were some really compelling reasons to take that job. You know, the number one being that for 20 odd years since I'd left Melbourne to, you know, go to Sydney to do Triple J Breakfast with Adam, I hadn't lived in Melbourne. And Melbourne was the place I started doing comedy. Melbourne is, you know, the place where I've done the festival, you know, all those years. It has my biggest audience. Like, there was just a real part of me that wanted the opportunity to live back in Melbourne again for a little while. So a job came up that, you know, meant that I could go back and live in Melbourne, and it was at the right time. I was coming back from America, and I wanted an excuse to be in Australia, you know, for a while, because it had been 10 years, you know, basically 6 months in Australia, 6 months overseas, and that's a long time to, you know, be on that schedule. And so it was a perfect opportunity that filled like a need, you know, like a desire in my life to do something. But I mean, I finished a year before the show finished, and that was because I'd forgotten how big an effect that it has on you as a stand-up breakfast radio. You know, it
Right.
really is, you know, I am just not a person who can wing it. It's just not the way I work. I don't think I'm talented enough for a start to be able to just go in and wing it. You know, I need to prepare. I need to be across things. I need to, you know, make sure that I do the hours and put in the work. That's always the way that I've done things. And, you know, if you add something in, it's very hard for me to take something away. You know, I just keep adding things on top of things. So I wasn't just doing breakfast radio. I was doing 4 weekly podcasts, and I was trying to do stand-up, and I was doing a television show. And, like, you know, so there was so many, you know, other things on my plate that eventually we got to the end of the 2019, and I was just like, well, the thing that I love the most, stand-up, you know, and this is why I guess these last 2 years have also been so confronting, is, you know, I ended 2019 going, next year I am going back to what I love to do the most, doing stand-up. I had 3 shows that I was going to do, 3 different shows, had them booked in for like tours in Australia and overseas. I had 1 year left on my US visa, so I was going to go and, you know, do some shows for the last year of my US visa. And like, it just really had this great year of stand-up planned. And then, of course, that was 2020. So, you know, the secret of comedy timing. So I think that's partly also why, you know, my relationship with stand-up and what it means to me has been so much on my mind, because for me, it doesn't feel just like I've had the last 2.5 years off. It feels like I've had 4 years off, because even though I did shows those 2 other years, I did the bare minimum of what I could do while I was doing the radio. Whereas what I really wanted to do was get back to the idea of doing lots of shows, not doing 30 shows a year, doing 150 shows a year or 200 shows a year, you know, the amount of shows that I really wanted to do. And so I think I've managed to get 30 out over the last 2.5 years, and probably I got, 50 out in the 2 years before that. So I really feel like I've had a really long time off stand-up, even in some of the time when I was doing stand-up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so would I go back to radio? I think the only way that I would go back to radio now is that if there was a space somewhere that just wanted what it is that I do on one of the podcasts. To say there was some sort of radio station, that suddenly just went, we do want like a 2-hour interview, show that where we talk about whatever, that, okay, sure. I could see that being a thing. But could I go back to what we know as commercial radio? I don't think so. I can't see that being part of my life now. And I think that that's good for me, and that's good for, it's time for the next generation of people to be able to come through and do those things. There's plenty of opportunities for me to talk and to say things and to get my point of view out there. I don't think that I need that day-to-day grind of mining my life and the world for content every day. In fact, I don't think that for me, it's particularly healthy. I think that what I like is being a longer form thinker.
All right, Wil, it's time for the final 5 questions, which are something we do regularly here on I've Got News for You. The first one, what's something not many people know about you?
That I absolutely adore the television show Gogglebox. It's probably the biggest turnaround on any TV show that I've ever had in my life. Like when I first heard about the idea of Gogglebox, we were on the set of Gruen. And I remember entertaining the crew and the team for about half an hour, just spouting off why people watching TV was the worst idea anybody had ever had, and Pop had eaten itself and shit itself out and eaten its own shit, and this was the end of everything we did, and it was time to burn it all down. And then I watched it and I realised it's just a super charming show. Like, I love the Australian version. I think it's really fantastic. But the UK version, I adore. Like, we have watched every episode of the UK version, and there's 14 series or something, and we've watched them all many times. Often they're talking about shows that we've never seen and personalities that we've never heard of, but we just feel like we have a relationship with these people in their lounge rooms. And I realized that I get it. They're all different people, but they're all connected by this thing that we all do together, which is watch television. And then you get to see these old friends and this gay couple and these, really old people, or these really young people, or these, people of a Pakistani background, or these people of whatever else. And you get to see them comment on the same show, and you learn a little bit about them, but also about the world, how different things are seen by the world. And particularly the last couple of years, as you've watched them see the news about Brexit, and you've seen them see the news about Corona. And we've been watching the Corona ones again from March 2020 through to what it is now, to be able to see, because you get to see in real time how we all reacted to it at the start. We thought it was about surfaces. We thought you could catch it from this. We thought, you get to see all those things. Oh, it's not really a thing. It's not going to be a big deal. Every step of that you get to see unfold as they watch, Boris Johnson on the news or whatever. And so I love it. Never has there been a greater turnaround from somebody who thought a show was the worst show on TV to I would not have got through the pandemic without Gogglebox.
What profession, other than being in the entertainment industry, would you like to attempt?
Well, I thought about that a lot during the time when I did not think I was going to get to be in the entertainment industry anymore. And I felt like I don't have a lot of options, to be honest. My best friend, one of my very closest best friends from high school, is a guy called Mark Howard, who people will know from the Howie Games. Really brilliant cricket and football commentator, Mark Howard, and he and I are really close high school friends. And Howie probably has a life that if I'd taken a couple of different turns that I would have liked, which was, I always really particularly wanted to be a cricket writer. That was my, kind of dream job, was to be a cricket writer, travel the world. And I, used to say, if anyone ever said, what's your dream? My dream was to go and watch test match cricket in all the countries where they play test match cricket. And I think the extension of that would have been that I would have loved to be a long form cricket writer, not like a day-to-day breaking stories cricket reporter, like a person who writes about the game and what the game means, and in a very long form way. I grew up adoring the writing of, turns out you shouldn't dig too much into perhaps the life of, but the writing of Peter Roebuck was like a favourite of mine when I was young, and just the way he wrote about cricket. He was not just writing about cricket, he was writing about the world. Gideon Hayes, one who does that, anyway, but there's a lot of people who are in that vein. Martin Flanagan does it a lot with football, that probably is a world that if I wasn't a comedian, I probably would have enjoyed doing, yeah.
Wil Anderson, who's someone that you'd love to meet?
Who's someone that I would love to meet? I've been very lucky. I will say this. I think that I've met most of the people that I would, most of the people who are alive that I would really like to meet, I've had the opportunity to meet. That's mostly probably because most of the people I really want to meet are people who work in my profession. Mm-hmm. So at some stage I've had the opportunity to meet Billy Connolly. I've had the opportunity to, meet John Cleese. I've had the opportunity to, kind of sometimes even work with these people, even more amazingly, the idea that you can be on a lineup with these people. You know what? I was in a room with Robin Williams once and I didn't get to have a conversation with him.
Wow.
But yeah, I reckon Robin Williams. If I'd had the opportunity, I remember I was in San Francisco at San Francisco Sketch Fest, and I heard Robin was there. And it was quite a big room, and I saw him over the other side of the room, and I was like, at some stage, hopefully I might, get in the vicinity of Robin. But it turns out when Robin's in the room, everybody wants to get in the vicinity of Robin. So I did not have that opportunity, but and sadly will never get to. But yeah, it probably would have been Robin Williams.
What is your favourite film of all time?
Oh, The Princess Bride probably is the one that comes off the top of my head. Yeah, I remember it changed my life, that movie.
How so?
My friend Sarah Bailey and he and I were about 14 years old, I guess, when that came out, 14, 15, and we both have sisters who are a couple of years younger than we are, and our parents charged us with taking our sisters to the movies, and we had to find a movie that the girls would like as much as, the boys would like. So Sale Cinema, didn't have a lot of options. So The Princess Bride, we went into it not knowing anything about the movie, and I think Sarah and I went into it thinking this is going to be absolutely terrible. And I remember just thinking, this is one of the funniest, cleverest, most charming, interesting movies that I've ever seen in my life. And so much of the underlying philosophy of that movie, like for a comedy movie, 30 years later, I rewatched it recently. There's no bum notes in it. Like, you rewatch like comedies from 10 years ago, you're like, I can't believe the homophobia or sexism or racism or in these things. And yet this movie from like that long ago is just still stands up so perfectly today. And then I started to find out more about William Goldman and realised he was this like Academy Award winning writer who had, written Butch Cassidy, The Sundance Kid and Misery and all these sort of like, famous films, and wrote these great books about Hollywood. And then it turns out The Princess Bride was based actually on a book that he'd written, which was a fictional book about a book that his grandfather read to him, but he'd made the whole thing up. And then so I suddenly realised there was the idea of like a mega narrative, and the idea that you could be more creative than just making something. You could have like these unfolding stories behind it. So I think that all those things with layers and things that aren't quite what you seem, or there are different versions of those things, have always been big in my work. Like often I'll have like a small version of something in stand-up and then like a bigger version of that story or that theme or that thing in something else. And I think a lot of that came from that first time ever just watching The Princess Bride. I couldn't do it all off the top of my head without it being on, but with it being on, I'm pretty sure I could almost do it word for word from start to finish, karaoke style.
Final question. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
So many good ones. Don't take criticism from somebody you wouldn't take advice from.
Oh, yeah.
Briggs said that to me on Wilosophy one day. Don't take criticism for someone you wouldn't take advice from. That's powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like that clears up a lot of your time.
That's amazing.
It's a really good way to put it, because criticism in itself isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Feedback can be, particularly, feedback can be a gift. Luke Darcy always used to say that. That's a very footballer thing to say. Feedback's a gift. When somebody criticises you, tells you what you're doing wrong, that's actually a gift, because it means that you can, do it better. You can improve it, right? But Briggs's way of looking at it, don't take criticism from somebody you wouldn't take advice from. It clears up two things. Firstly, which is that, of course, it's perfectly good to take criticism from people that you would also take advice from. That's a positive. Find those people, the ones that you trust their advice, so you also trust their criticism. Surround yourself by them. Be rigorous in showing your work and yourself to them so that they can, advise you and they can criticize you and they can get you to be a better person. But secondly, like the people who you wouldn't take advice from, why are you letting their criticism get in your head? Yeah. Beautiful. So it clears that up as well. The one that I actually think is bigger than that, because it's the one that I still to this day find the most challenging, and I constantly have to remind myself of it. When I was doing The Glass House back in the day, it's my first time hosting my own TV show. So this is like 20 years ago now. And Ted Robinson, who I'd grown up watching Good News Week, I'd grown up watching The Big Gig on ABC TV, which he produced. And then I'd started on Good News Week, which he produced, and then he was producing The Glass House. And he gave me this piece of advice when one day I was getting a little stressed by the stress of hosting a show and carrying it and all those sort of things. He said, remember, it's everybody's day at work. And what he meant by that was that makeup artist or that wardrobe person or that camera person or whatever, they're going to work today as well. And when they go home tonight and their partner or kids or whatever ask them how their day was, their friends ask them how their day was, they'll tell them how their day was. And you are a part of how that day was. Yeah. And they will either say, Wil was being a real dickhead and it made it much harder for me, or they will say, oh, it was a real pleasure and we got everything done, or what, do you know what I mean? Like that, yeah. It's everybody's day at work. That is still to this day the most challenging thing to live by, because it's broader than just at work, right? It's everybody's day at work when you go to the coffee shop. It's everybody's day at work when you're frustrated in traffic. It's everybody's day at work when you're standing in that line with all those other people standing in that line. So often we get pissed off at the person in front of us when it's the line that's the problem, not the person in front of us. They're standing in the line with us. Yeah. Let's not make their line experience any worse. We're actually in the line together, and let's bond together and overthrow the people who made the line so long. Perhaps that is the case. But it's not the fault of the person up the front of the line. They're not the one who organised the line either, or didn't have enough vaccines, or whatever the thing is. Don't take it out on that person there. But I think as a day-to-day thing, we've all got a million worlds going on. The reason you were on the phone at the coffee shop might have been because you're an absolute rude prick who doesn't get off the phone at the coffee shop. Or the reason you're on the phone at the coffee shop is you haven't talked to your grandma for a week because the reception's bad where she lives, and she's finally got through to you, and you know that you can't get off the phone because this is your own. We don't know, right? We don't know these things. And yet so often we react in that moment with anger and resentment or whatever else it might be, without going, it's a version of everybody else has got shit going on. Yeah. Remember, you've got heaps of shit going on? I know I do. I know that every day I've got a myriad of things, good, bad and indifferent, that I am dealing with. I would be naive to think that everybody else in the world doesn't have a myriad of good, bad and indifferent things that they are also dealing with. So remembering that it's everybody's day at work. The best bit of advice, but also the bit of advice that it is the hardest to live by.
Isn't Wil Anderson a fascinating fella? I absolutely loved chatting to him. Don't forget you can check him out at the Adelaide Fringe Festival and at next month's Melbourne International Comedy Festival. For all the show details, you can go to his website, wilanderson.com. Thanks for listening to I've Got News For You. I'll chat to you again tomorrow.